and international organizations, as you will discover in today, this morning, starting this morning, but in all your studies, they play an outsized role in pushing for sustainability. We have already had an intro to the Sustainable Development Goals, but specifically on public procurement. So we will be having with us this morning Anna Lupi online from the European Commission. There is a special section there working on procurement and on sustainable public procurement, and Anna is a main part of that unit. Then we will have Giuseppe Casale from ITCILO. ITCILO is an important fundamental partner for this program, and just a little bit of history. The ITCILO is offering 2 masters, one in English, one in French, on sustainable public procurement. And this partnership, which has been going on for, I think, 15 years, but maybe more. I try to stop counting so that I don't feel too old, but might be more. It's kind of one of the origins of this program, because it was within one of their programs that me and Martin, dear Martin Tribus, our training director, first met and started thinking, oh, we should be working together. And we never stopped. And they are not just working on sustainable public procurement, they are working on all aspects of sustainability, especially workers' rights, industrial relations, and so on. And Giuseppe Casale is the director of the Turing School of Development within the ITCILO. And the Turing School of Development is grouping not just the 2 masters, which are closer to our activity, but a portfolio. I just invite you to visit the website. A portfolio of masters is more than 10, and they are really focusing on very important aspects of sustainability. And then Farid Yaker from UN Environment, Paris, and again, the connection started with ITCILO. Giuseppe, you are a little bit like the magnet for everything that was happening. But there is, again, a long-standing collaboration, and UN Environment is really pushing sustainable public procurement across the world. They have a methodology, an SPP methodology that is adopted in many countries. And I was saying, well, UN Environment is pushing, it would be more appropriate and correct and truthful to say that Farid is pushing SPP across the world, and he will be really available to help us, to provide us with information. And so I really want to thank again Anna. Sorry for, okay, you are seeing the worst of me. Anna and Giuseppe and Farid for being here. Without further ado, please, Anna, you have the floor. I stay quiet.
Thank you, Roberto. Thank you for having me today. Although not in presence, unfortunately, I'm connecting from Brussels. But I hope my intervention will still be useful for you. Let me share maybe my presentation. I hope you can all see it. So I work for the European Commission in the Directorate General that deals with internal market and entrepreneurship. And we have a unit specifically dedicated to public procurement policy. So we deal mainly, we are the main drivers, let's say, of public procurement policy in the European Commission, and we also deal with the legal aspects of public procurement. Today, I wanted to give you a little bit of an overview of what we do in this area, in particular where we come from and what is the state of play of public procurement policy, with a specific attention, of course, to sustainability aspects, and where we are going at EU level after the Green Deal. And also what we do in terms of actions to support public buyers, in particular in the EU member states. So maybe I will start with something that seems quite obvious, but it's worth repeating this. Procurement impact is huge, at least within the EU. It is what we can call a powerful market force, in the sense that it represents about 14% of the EU GDP. And public buyers in Europe buy a wide range of products, services, and works. So it has the potential to transform specific markets. And this has been really our starting point for years now on a reflection on how to improve our public procurement policy. I mean, if you look at the European directives on public procurement, and more specifically the directive on public procurement, which lays down the main rules on this issue, you will see that they are trying to encourage not only fair competition, which is, let's say, our traditional goal in the EU. So the idea is that public procurement law exists from the 70s, actually, to build an internal market on public procurement. And in order to do so, of course, you have to get rid of discriminations between different operators coming from different areas of the EU and from different member states. So that was, let's say, the main traditional goal of public procurement law and policy within the EU. But with the latest reform in 2014, we've also moved more and more, and we are still going to a certain extent in that direction. We are still improving from that point of view. We are trying to enable, first of all, public buyers to make, let's say, the wisest choice in terms of using, of course, public funds. But we are also trying to help them increasingly use public procurement to support their policy goals. And in particular, we've been putting a lot of effort in the last few years in supporting their efforts in using public procurement to support sustainability goals. So the idea that we have of sustainable procurement is that as a public buyer, you should be fully enabled to prioritize sustainability goals, while still keeping true to this idea that there is an internal EU market which is grounded on equal treatment and non-discrimination of operators, and which is responding also to logics of course, of fair competition and transparency. So we've been working a lot on developing in the past few years tools on green public procurement and on socially responsible public procurement. And you will see from what I will also tell you later that we've been working on green aspects and social aspects to a certain extent, pretty much in a silo for quite a long time. this is, of course, also due, you will understand, to the fact that we are a public administration, and there are different departments in charge of different policies. But we are increasingly, let's say, moving into the direction where we are, let's say, merging green and social aspects, particularly when we work on public procurement. I wanted to, first of all, give you a little bit, as I was saying, an idea of where we stand, what is the state of play, before I tell you a bit more about the direction that things are taking in terms of EU public procurement policy. So as some of you may know, we have a set of directives. These are basically legislation that lays down the rules on public procurement, on the procurement of utilities and concessions, and we also have some rules on remedies in the field of public procurement. Of course, there's quite a bit of case law of the Court of Justice on the topic of public procurement that has in part also driven the reform of 2014 of these rules, but it's still an important source of EU law in the field of public procurement. And of course, all the principles that we establish at EU level, they have to comply with the government procurement agreement of the WTO. So we also have fairly important international commitments that we've taken from a legal point of view with some partners, and we also, of course, continuously negotiate new free trade agreements bilaterally with some countries. And of course, and this is going to be an area that's going to grow in the next few years, we have sectorial legislation in the EU. So this is not necessarily legislation that is focusing per se on public procurement, but it's legislation that may be regulating different areas, different products, different services, or even different, let's say, different areas of policy, like social policy or labor law. And it's still legislation that somehow either links into the existing directives or establishes specific rules for public buyers to follow. In terms of the basic principles of EU public procurement, and these are quite important also to understand a little bit how we see sustainable public procurement. Of course, as I was saying, traditionally we are very much relying on the principles of non-discrimination, equal treatment, and transparency. And this is really the basis of EU law. However, these principles, I would say, are becoming they are becoming just as equal as the drive to pursue other policies at EU level, but they still remain very important because they shape, let's say, the principles of the major principles of EU law in this field. And the most important one is perhaps the link to the subject matter of the contract. So there's this idea that the directives do not regulate what public buyers have to buy. They are completely free to make their choice. But whenever they use a specific tender requirement or criterion, this criterion has to be related with the product, the service, and the works that they are buying. There's a wide definition of the link to the subject matter in the directives, of course, because these considerations can relate to any stage of the life cycle or the production process of the purchase. But of course, the link to the subject matter is at the same time, if you want, a little bit a guarantee that the principles of equal treatment and non-discrimination will be complied, because this principle basically prevents a public buyer from let's say, discriminating against an operator depending on the nature and the origin of an operator. However, it also constitutes a little bit a limit, because you cannot set as a public buyer a requirement which is not related, for example, to the overall practices and policies of a company. So, for example, it prevents a public buyer to require the operator to apply corporate social responsibility as a general policy of the company. It doesn't, however, prevent buyers, of course, to use sustainability considerations in public procurement. So, as I was saying, it's becoming more and more important in our policy to support sustainability considerations. And in many cases, we really have to sort of make the business case for public administrations to use sustainable public procurement. And this is because, of course, public buyers often are understandably risk averse, precisely because they have to deliver a service. They are bound in many cases to deliver a certain service to their community, so they cannot risk, let's say, having a procurement that goes without any offers. They have budgetary constraints, so they often wonder if using sustainability considerations is going to be it's going to make their purchase more expensive. So we generally come with the idea that sustainable public procurement is good for many reasons. And it actually helps the public administration who is carrying out the purchase. And that's because it helps the public buyer to identify and address environmental and social risks. Many of these can also become reputational risks. I mean, we've seen in the past some scandals in some of the EU member states, which were linked, for example, to the fact that some products and services were provided without any compliance to fair labor standards. It also helps a public administration, of course, stimulate responsible and sustainable markets. And it's a sign, let's say, to the community that you really care as a public authority about sustainable governance. So you don't have a double standard. You're not supporting, let's say, the protection of the environment and socially responsible and ethical behavior in your policies, and then you don't keep true to these standards when you're actually buying something as a public authority. And that, of course, builds trust in institutions and also in the market to a certain extent. It's also a wise way, when done properly, to ensure effective public expenditure, because you are essentially, you're not just looking at the purchase, you're also looking at the impact of the purchase, and so you're providing additional benefits for your community. And as I was saying, it's a matter of policy consistency. You're not applying double standards. So in a nutshell, is sustainable public procurement compulsory? currently in EU public procurement law? Not really, not yet. And this is true to a certain extent, in the sense that there's a clause in the directives requiring member states to make sure that public buyers introduce or at least make sure that they respect environmental, social, and labor law obligations that may be set at EU, national, or international level. So this is a fairly general clause. It's also very difficult to monitor how it's applied in the member states. It depends very much also on the concrete institutional setting in the member states. But as a principle, if there's a labor law or an environmental obligation, it should be complied with in the context of each public contract. So, speaking a little bit about the EU policy on public procurement, now that you have a bit of an idea, hopefully, of how let's say the legal setting works, I just wanted to give you a little bit a flavor of where we are going, especially with the Green Deal. As I was saying, we have worked for a number of years now on green considerations, and more recently more and more on social considerations as well. So it's nothing new, let's say, at Commission level and at EU level. However, ambitions have, I would say, skyrocketed now with the adoption of the Green Deal at European level. And there is going to be more work coming in the next few years, both from the point of view of providing more support to public buyers, but also in terms of producing legislation. And from a certain point of view, you can also say that our role has changed quite a bit over the years. We used to be, at least in the Commission, or at least in my Directorate General, we used to be a bit the guardians of EU legislation on public procurement. So we were working a lot on enforcement and taking care of infringements, monitoring if member states were actually complying with the rules. Of course, to a certain extent, we are still doing that, but we are increasingly moving towards a direction where we are a bit less the guardians, and we are a bit more assisting member states in implementing public procurement policy, rather than just sticking to the rules. So the idea with the Green Deal is really to continue in that direction. The new Circular Economy Action Plan basically announces that we will be working on an action which is called Big Buyers. Essentially, this is one of the main actions that we use at Commission level to support public buyers in developing their skills and their experience in the use of green considerations. It consists essentially in providing support to a number of buyers who have more or less the same purchasing needs and who are facing the same challenges when it comes to using green considerations. And we basically make sure that they can sit together and discuss their challenges and come to let's say, shared solutions, and produce develop tools together to tackle them. So at the moment, there are 3 working groups, one on electric vehicles, one on circular construction materials, and one on zero emission sites. And there is going to be a new iteration of this initiative very soon, and it's going to be even larger than the one we have right now, and it's probably also going to cover social considerations which are currently not really covered. The other major action is which relates to support to public buyers is a guide on investing in sustainable procurement of infrastructure. This is something that we are going to develop on the basis of stakeholder engagement exercise. So we will consult widely, mainly with public buyers, but also with parts of the market to see, let's say, what is the state of the art in terms of sustainable infrastructure out there, and how we can advise public buyers to go through the process of buying sustainable infrastructure. But then, as I was saying, there's going to be also a major effort of producing legislation, sectorial legislation, and to a certain extent, this is going to change the shape of EU legislation in the field of public procurement, in the sense that, as I was explaining before, currently the EU public procurement directives do not tell public buyers what to buy. They just tell them how to buy, how the procedure should be structured, and which principles it should be guided by. But in this case, we're going to try to set some mandatory targets for sustainable public procurement, or even in some cases some mandatory green public procurement criteria in a number of fields. There is going to be legislation in the field of food and catering services that's going to be adopted under the Farm to Fork strategy in the next few years. We are working on a sustainable products initiative, which let's say it should cover some extremely strategic products like construction materials, steel, but also ICT. There's already a batteries regulation, a proposal for a batteries regulation that was published at the end of last year, which includes some specific provisions on public procurement, requiring the use of environmental criteria from public buyers. Of course, we'll see how negotiations between the co-legislators will go, because these proposals are, of course, discussed and amended by the European Parliament and the Council. And there's also a proposal for a new energy efficiency directive, which imposes some obligations on public buyers on using energy efficiency criteria when in their public purchases. So we will see exactly which shape this legislation will take. It is very likely that some of these legal proposals will just lay, let's say, the ground, the basis for the Commission to then develop, together with the member states, specific technical criteria for public procurement. In some cases, however, it's also possible that there will be, let's say, more specific obligations for public buyers already in the text of this legislation. When I talk about legislation, it's mainly going to be related to green public procurement aspects, so environmental obligations, but many of these proposals will also cover, to a certain extent, social considerations. but there are also specific developments in the field of social policy and social legislation that concern public procurement. Recently, an action plan on the implementation of the European Pillar of Social Rights was published, and it announced the publication of the guide on socially responsible public procurement and the guide on innovation procurement. But what's more important is that we currently have two proposals, one on minimum wage and one on pay transparency, which is basically a proposal on closing the gender gap on the workplace in terms of salaries. And both these directives link up to the public procurement directives, and in particular to the provision I was mentioning before, which requires, let's say, compliance of labor law in the performance of the contract. So again, these are just proposals. It's a matter of seeing how the legislative process will develop, but we are quite confident that these proposals at the end of when the legislation will be adopted will still link quite clearly to the public procurement directives. And then there's an upcoming social economy action plan, which will also very much focus on social aspects of public procurement, with a number of different actions that DG GROW will probably develop with the colleagues working on social economy in DG Employment. Maybe I just wanted to quickly mention a few of the initiatives that we are carrying out in support of public buyers. We try to produce a number of tools that can be used by public buyers. Most of these are really quite practical, in the sense that we've been in some of the member states in the past few years with trainings on green public procurement, and we've produced a GPP training toolkit, which public buyers in the member states can just pick up and use to train their staff. We constantly update and produce new green public procurement criteria. So these are essentially sectorial green procurement criteria, which can be copy pasted in the tender documents, or can form the basis of inspiration for public buyers to use green considerations. We are also developing some life cycle costing tools. This is an area where certainly member states would like us to do even more than we do, because life cycle costing is extremely complex, of course. But slowly but surely we are getting there ourselves. And there has been also quite a bit of work on social considerations, where we've collected good practices. We have launched a social media campaign last year to promote the use of social considerations with some promotional videos. We have, as I was saying, a number of support tools. In particular, I wanted to mention a guide on green public procurement and a help desk that we've made available for public buyers in the EU. Basically, any public buyer can call us or can send us an email and ask a question on practical aspects of using green considerations. From next year on, it will be a sustainable public procurement help desk, so it will also cover social aspects. And we have issued in 2020 a competency framework on public procurement. The idea is that we've mapped all possible competencies that a public buyer can have. with different levels of expertise and different levels of advancement, let's say. And it's a way to help public administrations test the skills that they have in-house and see which skills need to be further developed, or what kind of profile they would need to recruit in order to improve their public procurement staff. Finally, a word on the Buying Social Guide that we've adopted this year. It's really a practical guide for public buyers. We've tried to provide concrete indications. So it's not really a policy document. It's a document for those who are getting into the nitty-gritty of doing public procurement. We've tried to provide some examples also taken from the real life experience of EU public buyers across the EU. And the idea is that the guide covers the whole procurement process from start to finish, including, let's say, some of the organizational aspects, the preparation, the engagement with stakeholders, the risk assessment, consultation of the markets, and of course also contract execution and implementation of the social commitments taken by the contractor. And it covers the topic of socially responsible procurement horizontally, which gave rise, let's say, to a discussion, an internal discussion on how to define socially responsible procurement, which we have sort of refrained from defining. We provide some indications on what are the social objectives that can be pursued and are normally pursued through public procurement. So there are some, let's say, more traditional ones like social and professional inclusion, or promoting fair working conditions in public procurement. But there are also some up and coming ones like gender equality, of course, and due diligence in global supply chains, which is becoming more and more relevant currently. And we will promote this guide also in the next few months through a cycle of short lunchtime talks. The first one is going to take place on the 12th of October, and it's going to focus on the objective of professional integration. And we're going to have two very good speakers, one from Sweden and one from France, who will tell us a bit about their experience with using essentially employment clauses to favor, let's say, the recruitment of disadvantaged persons. Finally, maybe a word on, I wanted to give you a little bit an overview of all the activities we carry out on in terms of public procurement policy. So there are four main areas: strategic procurement, which also encompasses, of course, sustainability. As I was saying, we also still very much take care of the legal framework and provide assistance to the member states on legal aspects. But we also focus very much also on data and digitalization. So these are two aspects which are very much related, and they will become more and more important for sustainable public procurement. At the moment, it's very hard, and I'll be very frank with you on that. We don't have precise figures on how much sustainability considerations are used, how widespread they are at European level, because there is no way to monitor the use of these clauses. So one of the main objectives in the near future will be to slowly provide member states with the tools to do so, and also have a better idea at European level. And from this point of view, we've already worked with the EU member states on new standard forms, which will enable national authorities to let's say flag when they've used green or social considerations in public procurement. It is very little. These let's say these fields in the standard forms will be optional. So some member states are going in the direction of deciding that they want to make them mandatory for their public buyers to tick. So it's very little, but it's going to already make a huge difference for the member states, but also for the Commission in terms of knowing what's going on the ground. And then, of course, there's the area of what we call level playing field and trade issues, which relates to let's say international public procurement. So anything that has to do with third countries which are not part of the EU. In this field, of course, there's an increased attention to the strategic dependencies, let's say, of our public procurement systems from providers and productions that are carried out outside of the EU. And so there's going to be increasingly attention towards whether, for example, the providers who participate in EU markets are subsidized by foreign countries. There's a proposal currently that's being discussed by the co-legislators on foreign subsidies, which also relates to certain aspects of public procurement. We've issued recently a guide on third country bidders, and it basically tells public buyers in the EU how they should behave when they receive a bid from an operator coming from a non-EU member state. Of course, I was mentioning the government procurement agreement before, and the free trade agreements. We have some, let's say, as EU, we have some privileged relations with the countries with whom we've concluded international agreements. They usually benefit from equal access on our markets as EU operators. But the topic of sustainable procurement and how we set sustainability standards is going to be extremely important from an international perspective too. Obviously, if we start setting obligations for public buyers to use certain green or social considerations, this is going to impact also the let's say the participation of third country bidders, and it is clearly a very strategic area of our policies at the moment. So this is all from my side. I hope it was not too unclear, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Anna. That was really a great presentation. There are many points. Do you still have a kind of 5 minutes to take some questions?
Yes, sure.
Okay, brilliant. If anyone has a question, just please, SG, just please to come to this micro. You switch it on like this. and you introduce yourself. Just come this way so she will be able to see. Oh, no, she can see you. Oh. Yeah, things are happening. Our online participants finally are online. It has been a disaster here, dear Anna, but apparently now the magic is working. They must have prayed the right small god of internet. Please, Esgi.
Hi, I'm Ezgi. I'm ESR7. I'll be working on contract performance. I have a question about the upcoming minimum wage directive. Is it going to set a minimum wage across Europe?
Is the question clear?
Yes.
She's
Yes.
asking. Okay, please.
No, the idea of the directive, as far as, I mean, I'm not an expert, but the idea of the directive is to set rules for member states, then to set a minimum wage, and to a certain extent, member states will have to, it's a directive, so by definition it's an instrument that has to be transposed by adapting it to the national system and the national legislation. Just to give you an idea, some member states in the EU rely a lot on legislation, on laws, to set minimum wages, but in other member states, the tradition relies more on collective agreements, for example. So it's really a framework of rules to make sure that in member states there's somehow an infrastructure providing for a minimum wage that is fair for workers, but it's not going to set a European minimum wage.
Thank you so much.
This is so interesting that we have already 3 questions. Please introduce yourself shortly.
Yeah.
Keep it.
How is it? Yeah, I'm Laura. I'm in ESR 8 about human rights and sustainable public procurement. And my question is whether you mentioned that there's a problem about monitoring how these sustainable criteria are used in contracts. And my question is, do you see systems of artificial intelligence monitoring which criteria are used in which part of a tender and into not only for enforcement, but also for enhancement of how it is used?
It's one of the ideas and it's one of the technologies that will probably help, but for the time being, we try to rely, at least in the Commission, we try to rely as much as possible on what the buyers say that they are buying. That's a little bit the idea that the European, let's say, data space on public procurement is built around. So it is likely that at some point these technologies will be used at European level, but also at member states level, because I see that there's quite a lot of interest. But for now, it's still a bit early.
Thanks, Anna. There was a question, please, Julia, and then we have Federica, and then we have Farid. Wow. Julia, please.
Good morning. Thank you for your intervention. I'm Giulia, and I'm from the University of Milan, and I'm interested in the topic in the interrelation among public procurement and human rights. And I was wondering whether in the DG Grow there is any interest regarding the aspect of human rights due diligence and its interrelation with public procurement. Because I know that there is under negotiation and under discussion the possibility to implement a directive on mandatory environmental and human rights due diligence, and which is under discussion at the moment. and has been proposed by the Parliament. And I was wondering whether there are any interests to link it also to public purchasing. Thank you.
Yes, thanks for the question. So the idea is that DG GROW is actually co-leading on the proposal on due diligence. I think it's called officially Sustainable Corporate Governance. So it's both the Directorate General responsible for justice policy and DG GROW who are leading on that. So there is a team actually working on this proposal at the moment. It's a little bit early for me to say whether it will be actually linked to public procurement, because the legislative process is going, at least for the publication of the proposal, is going way slower than we had expected initially. I think it was announced already for last year, but it turned out to be a lot more complex than we expected to go through the internal process for the validation of the proposal. So it's difficult to say. What I can say is that in the last few years there has been a lot of interest from different types of actors on the topic of human rights and public procurement, which has also pushed us and helped us at the same time to pay more attention ourselves. There are also a lot of public buyers who are very interested in this topic and who are always a little bit let's say asking for help on the topic. So you can count on the fact that we will be working on this issue quite a bit in the next few years, but it's difficult to say whether there will be explicit links with the proposal on sustainable corporate governance.
Thanks a lot for the answer. Farid, please. Farid from UN Environment is not one of our PhDs, but he would be most welcome in many activities, I guess.
Hello, Anna. I'm trying to speak to the camera. I think that's the right thing to do. Thanks for the very rich and informative presentation. I really like the fact that you outlined the next steps for the work of the Commission. In particular, and it was alluded to in the last question, the issue of monitoring sustainable public procurement is also of interest to UNEP, as you know. And we had the joint meeting EC-UNEP 2 months or 3 months ago, and we planned to work together on this aspect. So I wanted to renew our interest to collaborate with you on this. As you know, we're working on the SDG 12.7 monitoring, and it's of interest to us also to know how much of green procurement or sustainable procurement countries achieve at what level. So I think there should be some international harmonization of the measurement of sustainable procurement. So we're interested really to follow what's happening in the EC in this regard. We need to have, first of all, a classification of public procurement, and this is not happening. We need to know how much the spend analysis, needs to be harmonized. We need to use harmonized classification codes. We have UNSPSC, we have CPVs, we have a number of instruments, and so it's not easy really to compare, public procurement from country to country. And then there is a problem of how much is green, and what is green, etc. So it's really a huge subject. My question is, can you just tell us more on the Sustainable Products Initiative, really briefly? Do you have an idea of the products that will be concerned by this initiative? Thank you, Anna.
Thank you, Farid. It would be brilliant to be able to have an international system for monitoring procurement, because it would allow us to also compare. Of course, as you said, there are many challenges, and one of the main ones is also how do you define public procurement, but especially how do you define green public procurement, and this is, I think this is going to be a challenge which we will have to face in the Commission fairly soon. But coming to your question, I'm sorry to give very evasive answers, but today, but we don't really have at the moment a precise idea of the coverage of the Sustainable Products Initiative. To be honest with you, there was a time when it was taken into consideration also the possibility to cover some services. I think now we're back at the stage where products will be covered. I think some of the main, but don't take my word for this, because things might still change. Essentially, the proposal is going through the internal impact assessment board, and so until it comes out alive from that kind of scrutiny, it's extremely hard to know what is going to be the scope, because the impact assessment obviously analyzes the different legislative options that are presented. So it's difficult to say, and I'm pretty sure that in the case of the Sustainable Products Initiative, the different legislative options will also very much relate to the scope of the proposal itself, not just, let's say, the legislative technique with which the scope will be regulated. So it's difficult to say. I would hope that at least the initial idea to cover some of the strategic sectors that I mentioned before will be respected, because for those sectors, I think it will be important to establish some sustainable procurement, at least targets, if not criteria. But it's still a bit all up in the air. We'll probably know more by the end of the year, but at this stage, I would also doubt that the proposal itself will come out at the end of this year. It will probably still take, I would say, more. I think it's more likely that we will see it in early 2022.
Thanks a lot for your very articulated answers. We don't have any urgent question now, but our Federica, you were lost. Sorry, we still have one. I just messed up. This technology stuff just made me. Okay, never mind. Please.
I just wanted to ask you, because right now one of the monitoring system that you have is through member states submitting national action plans to you, and I reviewed them, and last year during my master thesis, and I realized that there were a bunch of states that were not taking this really seriously, and I wanted to ask you if you were foreseeing a more stringent way to like not enforce, but to push member states to take this monitoring evaluation of their green and social public procurement systems more seriously, and if this has been taken into consideration in the European Green Deal concerning green public procurement.
Thanks. It's a very pertinent question. I can tell you that right now, I mean, in the past 2 or 3 years, we've been working a lot with member states on developing their e-procurement systems. And there's been really work, let's say, hand in hand with some of the member states. That might help, because to a certain extent we've also encouraged convergence of e-procurement systems and convergence in the way data is treated in this context. What we are reflecting on, but it's still very much let's say internal kitchen for the time being, is to provide more and more assistance to the member states. I mean, in the absence of any specific obligation to monitor green procurement or sustainable procurement, what we can do is be persuasive, of course, and to provide more assistance. There are some member states which are even calling for a more proactive role of the Commission in this field, because they have every interest to be able to exchange good practices with other member states, or to at least compare their situation. And these are usually the member states which already have some data at national level. In some other member states, as you say, I don't know if the issue is not taken seriously, because I see that by now most member states have teams and structures to deal with sustainability considerations, or even to provide through, for example, competence centers, some assistance and some support to their public buyers on issues of sustainability. So I'm not sure they're not taking it seriously, but often there's a reluctance also to tell the Commission something that member states are not obliged to disclose. It could be lack of data, it could be lack of interest in some cases, it could also be reluctance precisely to make some information public, because they don't feel they are up to speed with the rest of the EU. So we'll see, but I think I cannot predict the future, but I think that if there's going to be any major horizontal legislative shift in the next few years, which at the moment is not planned. I mean, we're not planning a revision of the directives, but I think when we are going to revise the directives, one of the major issues will be precisely monitoring. And I think there's quite a bit of work to do, not only in terms of setting obligations, but precisely as we did with e-procurement, work together with the member states. There will be issues also of, as Farid was mentioning, of comparability of data on how you collect and how you can make sure that data is comparable. So it's not work that you can impose from the top down, let's say.
Question by Martin Tribus, our training director from Birmingham University.
Yes, it is on. Hi. So I'm speaking to the camera. Let me say before I start, I'm a friend of the Commission. I wanted to do well because I want my friends to do well. I'm just saying that because, yeah, perhaps a bit provocative, the question. It seems you're engaging a lot in guidance, soft law. So I wonder whether you've all gone a bit soft, meaning your core business and your unique power is to produce hard law. And that is something that in your the last answer you said kind of featured kind of for the first time. I think the new directive, the reform of the directives, it's getting a bit late. Can you perhaps say a bit more on when that is going to come about and why the Commission is kind of shifting into these guidance notes, guidance papers, guide to social procurement, soft law instruments, when it is actually the only power in Europe that can produce hard law. So why are you not doing your core business? And I know this is exaggerated. For educational reasons, I permit myself to be a bit like that.
No, it's again another very pertinent question. I think because it is one of our unique powers. I mean, to a certain extent, what is not planned at the time being is precisely a revision of the horizontal rules on public procurement. And that is for many different reasons. I mean, it's first of all, it's political appetite, to be entirely honest. So it really depends. I mean, we are not really a technical body. We have political masters too, and they are clearly not going in that direction, at least for in this not this mandate of the Commission. But also there's clearly a bit we've seen with the last reform a little bit of fatigue. It took member states quite a bit to digest the current rules, and they've been getting into their stride of applying these rules for maybe 2 or 3 years in some cases. So let's say that we didn't want to overburden anyone with a new reform, although it's also true that if we reform the directives, it will be years before they are actually implemented in the member states anyway, because it's a process that takes a really long time. But also it's something that I've mentioned before. We see increasingly that it's very nice to impose obligations on public authorities, but in order for these to work, we have to do a lot of work with them. Sometimes, and it's work that can be wildly different depending on the national context. Sometimes you have to actually persuade your public administrations that something is good for them, and it's good for them to change a little bit their mindset and systems. Sometimes it's more technical work. So that's why we are going more into the business of engaging with public buyers rather than producing legislation. That being said, your question is a little bit provocative in the sense that, as I was saying before, we are currently more in the business, at least when it comes to sustainability, of looking at it as a sectorial problem, in the sense that we realize that let's say a horizontal obligation to buy sustainable, for example, may not always give the desired results, and it's probably a little bit more productive and probably a little bit less leading to greenwashing to look at a specific sector and see how sustainability can be tackled in the specific sector through public procurement. So that's a little bit that's a little bit how things are at the moment.
No, I totally agree. Sectoral is probably the next future. Just two short questions from Marta and Bojana, please. First Marta, and then we have Bojana, and then we go on with the rest of the panel. But thank you for your time.
Good morning, Anna. Thank you for your presentation. I'm a little bit in a similar line of thought of Martin, slightly provocative, because I would want to take it a little bit further. The legislation is one thing. Another thing is also actually commission suing, right? This is one of the tools that you can use to go after countries, also for inappropriate implementation of some of those articles. I'm particularly interested with Article 18.2. We have Tim Case. We have several countries, our not so long time ago brother of the UK, but also Denmark, where I'm based, that didn't directly implement, for example, Article 18.2. If this is a principle and it hasn't been implemented, that we obviously, from perspective of sustainable public procurement, have an issue. There doesn't seem to be much action there. But then also, I find a little bit confined, and I was wondering whether you can comment on that, because while there is for sure a need for the soft tools and guidelines, as you said, cooperation, at the same time, there is acknowledgement within Green Deal that this sort of approach of carrot did not work. The last 10 years, we didn't see sort of much really development. The countries that have been working with this and have been pushing the agenda, they've been, but not necessarily the ones that are from different reasons, not that much into the subject matter. So at the same time, Green Deal introduced this sectoral, or predicts introduction to sectoral mandatory provisions, right? But if we're doing mandatory provisions, that we need to enforce them. So if the Commission continues to not to be willing to take actions, how are we going to enforce those obligatory measures, if that makes any sense? I would be very interested in hearing your opinion. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the question. I mean, it's a complex one. I'll be super frank with you. The last 2 mandates of the Commission have seen a clear decreasing interest in enforcement in general. And so there's also very much less interest at political level to go for infringements. And as you may know, infringements are not really a technical instrument of the Commission. They're very much a political instrument because they have to be validated politically by the commissioners. So that means that at technical level, I mean, we do the technical work on the legal issues, but then it's a political decision to sue a member state. And that tends to happen lately only very much for the very clear-cut legal issues. It doesn't really happen anymore where there's grounds for uncertainty. And even when the legal issue is very clear-cut, there has to be something more in the game, let's say, for a political decision to go for an infringement to go through. So considering that, Article 18 is not really the best candidate, let's say, for infringements, precisely because its formulation is so open in terms of how concretely it will be implemented, because it only talks about appropriate measures to be adopted by the member state. And I think that is the reason why you haven't seen any action on this from our side. It is, of course, not super promising from an enforcement perspective, considering that we want to impose legal obligations on sustainable procurement at sectorial level. But also, I think it is a way to bring in precisely those member states who are extremely reluctant still. I mean, let's say the top of the class, as you said, will continue to work on it no matter what, because there is clearly in these member states there's a widespread political interest. There's interest in the let's say the public opinion on this type of topics. The member states who are lagging behind, they will need an additional push, and I think it can also come from legislation. I think in most cases this legislation will be implemented years from now. So I hope that by then we will be a little bit tough with obligations, with legal obligations. especially because these obligations are supposed to be, or I hope that they will be a bit more clear cut than than the one we have in Article 18. At least when it comes to implementation, I mean, some of these rules that will be established with sectorial legislation will be adopted through regulations as well and through delegated acts. So hopefully, you know, if there isn't much space for implementation at member state level, then we will have a bit more of a clear-cut case, and that might help. But again, we will have to see what happens a few years from now.
Thanks a lot for your frankness. This is very much appreciated by us, the scientists, if you want. And last, Bojana, please.
Thank you. Good morning, Anna, and thank you for your presentation and very insightful information as to the Commission's practice and initiatives. And after all this talk on enforcement and reform as well, in the previous two questions, I couldn't help but wonder whether what you mentioned, that the Commission is not very interested in enforcement right now, is the main reason why the reform of the remedies directive has been put to a halt, and whether you have any information as to when there will be any movements in that field. Thank you.
Thanks for the question. I think this is even less likely to happen anytime soon than the reform of the procedural rules on procurement. Partly because remedies is a very tricky issue, politically speaking and legally speaking. I think there we are really at the limits of EU competence in terms of the subject matter that we are regulating. So, and I don't see any sort of appetite for revising those rules. In many cases, they are considered by some member states more than sufficient, and I think probably some EU member states would have a hard time accepting that we revise the rules. Also, because I think if we do revise the rules, we are going to end up having something a bit more detailed than what we have right now. It wouldn't make any sense to go a bit more generic. So I don't think it's something for the near future. Certainly not for this mandate of the Commission.
Thanks a lot, Anna, for again the very frank answer. Thanks a lot for giving us so much of your time. I guess you had already sensation that more questions and more mails will come to your way in the next 3 years. But of course, the worst thing that can happen to a PhD, especially in law, and we have 15, not all of them law, is to have a new piece of legislation in the last month of their thesis writing. So they will writing you a kind of anxious mails at a given point. And I already thank you for being available. And of course, you will be more involved as long the project goes on, because we will be really very happy to hear your views and suggestions. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. You are welcome.
Thank you very much.
But if you have other commitments, it's really up to you. Thanks, really. Grazie di cuore, come diciamo noi. Have a great
Grazie a voi.
day. Bye-bye. And now, without further ado, I will just invite Giuseppe Casale to take the floor. So now we go to the UN system.
Very good. Thank you very much. So let me, first of all, congratulate Anna for this excellent presentation and overview of the complexity of this topic. Is a topic which you have already realized how difficult it will be in the coming years to be handled. Let me give a bit of the history of what happened with this public procurement. So the very first organization which actually started to talk about the need to protect workers' rights within public contracts has been the ILO. Unfortunately, this international organization lasted for more than 100 years, and it seems that it has done everything well before all the others came along. And the very first convention which had been entered into force only in 1952 was Convention number 94, which is on public contracts. This convention was approved in June 1949 by the International Labour Conference. These conventions had a very, let's say, up and down interest, because as you can imagine, depending on the various changes in the geopolitical scenarios, this convention was here and there revived. And when this convention was started to be revived? Well, this convention started to be revived immediately after the collapse or the fall of the Berlin Wall. Because with the enlargement, and therefore the need to be careful where all these public procurements were going, in particular, the international trade union movement, but also hand in hand with the European Union at the Brussels level, decided to put more emphasis on the need of inserting labor clauses in the public procurement process. In fact, many of the accession countries and all the countries of the Central and Eastern European had to change their respective national legislations in order to be in line not only with the European Union directives and therefore with the acquis communautaire, but also with the implementation in practice of the ratified conventions. The Convention 94 is an interesting convention because it goes even further than any of the current European Union directives which have been mentioned by Anna. There are two directives, as you know, at the European Union level, which deals with the public procurement, with public contracts. One is the most recent one, Directive 2014, number 24, and the other one was the previous Directive 96, going back to 1971. But this is, you know, exactly, you know better than anyone else. But where is the crux of the matter here in these two very important directives, which represents the European Union legal framework? Where actually these two directives practically ignore mentioning ILO Convention 94. Was this done on purpose? We don't know. But certainly this is, you know better than I do, that whenever a directive comes to life, is the end results of huge consultation within the European Union settings. But these directives, of course, particular Directive 2014, well, refers to the ILO core conventions. And the ILO core conventions, you know better than I do, are the famous 8 conventions which are regrouped under the ILO Declaration on the Fundamental Principles and Rights at Work of 1998. And as a piece of information, in the last conference, which was done face-to-face, which was done in June 2019 to celebrate the ILO centenary, there was an ILO centenary declaration of the ILO in which it says that also the 2 major conventions dealing with the health and safety at work will become also part of these core conventions. So very likely in 22, so practically next year, the 2 conventions on health and safety will be associated to the 8. So the package of the core conventions will become 10 and no more 8. Now, the problem with the interpretation of how and why is so difficult, and this was very interesting, all your questions which were put forward to Anna, and very good answers also from Anna, why is so difficult to enforce? Well, listen, it's difficult to enforce because there have been case law which have been ruled by the European Courts of Justice. And the European Courts of Justice, and this has been also the signal that the new Europe, the Europe of before 28, now of course of the 27, was also changing its attitude vis-à-vis the so-called enforcement of the, we call it, entre guillemets, social rights. Because there were 2 cases in front of the European Court of Justice. One was in particular called the Ruffert Doctrine, that you probably know and studied deeply in details, and the other one, which has a name which is impronounceable for me, which is Bunderkrug-Regi judgment, in which practically the judges of the European Court of Justice, and of course, these judges, you know better than I do, were coming from Central and Eastern Europe, because there is a turnover, and that time we had the Polish and also, if I don't remember, Lithuanian judges, but don't quote me for this. I mean, my memory is losing right now. But these judges were practically extremely important because they said that there is, at the European Union level, there is a problem of non-exportability of the labor clauses in other countries. So here again, this thorny question between respect of the labor rights of the workers' rights and, on the other hand, the respect of the economic freedoms. It's not freedom only, but there are freedoms, etc. So the problem is that with these 2 sentences, it's difficult also for even for the current Commission going ahead with a different kind of legislation. Of course, time will say whether or not the right mix has been founded in certain countries. And it has been interesting that from certain labor lawyers and also European judges, in particular the Italian one, who have introduced a sort of, in some of the, I will call it parallel lateral sentences, they've introduced the idea of respecting the Article 351 of the treaty, of the European Union, in order to prevent the risk of denouncing Convention 94 in those countries which had already ratified 94. Because the risk is that since the Convention 94 is much more stricter than the directive, could give the possibility to the member states of the European Union to abide to what the convention said, because it has been ratified and therefore has become also automatically national law, but it has at the same time also the risk of being denounced. Why? Because if you denounce Convention 94 and therefore you de-ratify that convention, automatically you are only covered by the European Union directive, in this case Directives 96 supplemented by Directive 2014, and therefore you have much more freedom in whatever you do in public contracts, in public procurement. Now, the whole idea here is that in order to combat, to fight both wage dumping and more broadly social dumping, it is very likely that, if it is possible, and Anna mentioned to it, that through the sectorial activity, and therefore, if it is possible, through the European sectorial collective agreements, it's possible that through the autonomy of the social partners, it's possible also to improve the situation imposed by the legislation. Now, how far this will go? Well, you know better than I do that we are still at the very beginning of a long process. It's not that it's going to be solved in few months. But certainly, one basic element that we have to bear in mind is that there is no possibility whatsoever to violate the minimum standards. Even though there is a possibility to go up and down with this situation, definitively, and this is also said by the European Court of Justice, you cannot go lower than the applicable minimum standards. So once again, we go back to the previous consideration. The previous consideration is to find the right mix. On the one hand, the respect of the social rights, and on the other hand, the respect, which is legitimate, of course, of the economic freedoms. One major, I would say, advancement at the international level, and this I refer in particular to the International Labour Organization, has been the most recent ILO declaration on the future of work. Now, in this declaration, which has directly, we'll say, a link with the current situation of the respect of the workers' rights, even though applies to everything, but in particular can be seen also in public contracts, in public procurement, is that there should be, and this is said in the declaration, there should be a universal recognition and entitlement to adequate working conditions and adequate wage to everyone, irrespective, this is important, this is the element that I wanted to say, irrespective of the nature of the contract of employment and irrespective of the legal status of the person who is working. In other words, here it's open up a new scenario. The scenario that we have lived with has always been, in studying in particular labor law, that he was referring to dependent employees. The subordination was the core criteria to apply the labor legislation and also whatever is around the labor legislation, which is, of course, also the social security law. Now, starting from 2019, the message is that the same laws apply no matter if you are a free rider, no matter if you are a Uber worker, no matter if you are a Stellantis worker. So practically the same kind of conditions needs to be enjoyed by everyone. Now, this has been said in what we call it the soft law, because the declaration, you know better than I do, has nothing to do with the force of law of a convention, not to mention the recommendation, but certainly is a principle up there, and the invitation to every single member states, the ILO has 187 member states, to move ahead with the respective national legislation in order to implement this principle. So we are at the beginning of a new journey. But also, I must say that if we started to look at the most recent tribunal sentences concerning, in particular, free riders, in the Foodora, the Glovo, the Uber, etc., and also in particular what's going on most recently, the state legislation in the New York states, in particular for all the platform labor workers, you see now that there is a tendency to recognize fully all the rights also for them. Now, has this something to do with the procurement of public contracts? Definitively, yes. Because in any public procurement, in any public contracts, and you know, because you are studying it, you have a myriad of others moving around once you have to implement these contracts. And you have the very small, the very micro, you have the autonomous, you have the independent workers, and you have also medium and larger enterprises. So the universe of all the market, of labor market, is there. And therefore, I think this is what I wanted to share with you. I'm not going to repeat whatever we do in our lectures on the international labor law, because I don't think this is the right moment to do it. But I thought that in order to link also with what Anna just said, and I found it, I repeat, quite extremely good, this has given me the opportunity to share with you these ideas. I stop here because I don't think I need to say more, but if there are any questions, please. Thank you.
Very thoughtful presentation. As you can see, we have already 2 questions. And just please come here at the micro so the recording will just take it.
Hi, thank you very much. Can you hear me? Yeah. I'm Martina. My PhD is on public procurement and human rights, especially in global supply chains. So I wanted to ask, how does the declaration work in terms of global supply chains? You know, what is the role of public buyers in enforcing minimum wage and working conditions in like global supply chains, and also what kind of remedies are available if these are violated in global supply chains from a public buyer perspective? Thank you.
Very good. I mean, I think the only possibility now is through the labor inspection services in the respective countries. You have probably seen that the European Union has also created lately an agency on enforcement and compliance with labor law. So practically what the remedy is there is try to enforce as much as possible labor inspection visits, in particular in the global supply chains. The global supply chains need to respect the law of the territory, of the local community. They are not exempt from this. So practically, my answer is very simple. As soon as the declaration is considered to be soft law, but within the declaration, there is a constant reference to those core conventions, which in principle should have already been ratified by the ILO member states, and therefore at least those conventions should be enforced. But I repeat, the complexity when you go around is much more than we thought. Thank you. Yes. Oni.
Yes, we still have, my name is Natalia Spataro, and I'd rather have a side comment on the previous presentation and also on the topics that were discussed before. And I was referring here to the specific topic of the political will of the member states who not really managed to adopt a sustainable policy and green public procurement practices. And my comment is consisting, for example, in my past professional career, I had the chance to speak with the public purchasing bodies of less, with the member states that have less economic opportunities within the EU. So they were really willing, for example, UNEP, the SPP of Romania, it was really willing to apply green public procurement or sustainable or social public. It's just simple that they were not able to do that because they were lacking the necessary capacity. So I would say here that it's not just a matter of political will, purely political will. It's also the capacity of a member state to be able to follow those policies. And how I see like an improvement in this situation, yes, we have the legal framework. It's important to be good lawyers, but I think we also need to develop a sort of a side thinking and think maybe how can the, for example, the DG GROW that Anna works within can cooperate, for example, with DG Regio for regional and urban policy in order this can allow funds to the less developed states and also to work from a legal point of view as well. Thank you.
Very good. I think you raised a very important aspect. In fact, this has been addressed, for example, by the World Commission, which worked on this world report called On the Future of Work. There are three major areas which then recommends these experts to the entire world, so including us. And these are increasing investments in people's capabilities. As you rightly said, we need to continuously have access to lifelong learning, increasing investments in the institutions of work. And the institutions of work is not only the legal framework, but is in particular the enforceability and the compliance of this law in locals area, and therefore strengthening the functioning of the tribunals, strengthening the functioning of the representation of the workers, but also of the employers, because we have a tendency to say that the workers are no longer representative, but also the employers. They have a serious problem of representation and representativeness. And finally, I want to say we need all of us to align, and this is what you said on sustainability, with the 17 goals of the UN 2030. I mean, I think this is, as a matter of fact, we are fully engaged, each of us individually and as a collectivity, to reach these goals, and in particular, as you said, reducing inequalities because they are becoming wider and wider, and also to have a better access not only to high quality physical products, but also digital products. Because the problem is that this digital divide will create a further problem in the near future if we do not act starting from now on. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Giuseppe. Any? Oh, yes, Giulia. No, they are really eager to know. And
No, it's very good. Excellent. Absolutely.
Thank you very much for your intervention. And I have a question a bit related to the question that Martina previously, the first question that was posed about responsible supply chains, labor rights, and the connection with public procurement. Because I was thinking about another declaration of ILO, the tripartite declaration on multinational enterprises and social policy. And I was wondering if, according to you, there could be any connections also with the aspect of public contracts and the role of multinationals to provide, to push for more responsible supply chains and transparent supply chains.
A very good question, and I'm sure that the two colleagues coming immediately after the break, Cristina Poncibò and Lorenza, will tackle exactly the topic that you have raised on corporate social responsibility. From an ILO point of view, we have always preached everyone, public and private, to abide to certain fundamental principles and rights to work. If you read, and you have read it, the multinational declaration, which has been amended in the years until most recently, you see that there is a constant reference to these core principles. Because the idea is that you cannot have access to the, let's call it, free market, let's put it this way, if you do not at least respect the minimum standards. So the interconnection there are always there. It's not that we read separately. We have always to keep the overall picture in front of us. So I'm sure that more specific examples will be given to you by Cristina and Lorenza. I think they come after us. Yes.
First of all, thank you very much for the comprehensive presentation and also the presentation of all the history behind the ILO Convention. My question is, I do not come from a law background, but I've been working a little bit with the UN organization, and I know that UN really loves declarations, soft law kind of instrument, and are very important. But I was wondering whether the ILO was also considering, or if it did, actually address the problem of helping public administration in really abiding to the ILO Convention by, for example, tackling the problem of managing risks that are connected with not respecting labor rights. So if there's any management kind of guidelines that ILO could use, for example, for public administration. I am doing the parallel, for example, with the UNCTAD declaration against corruption, where a lot of guidelines, a lot of risk management framework were put in place in order to support declaration and law kind of instrument with more management principles. So I was wondering if there's anything similar to support enforcement on the practical ground, basically to help public administration to really also practice.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Public administration is very broad term, as you can imagine. But for the ILO, we have a specific convention, which is the Convention 150 on labor administration, which was established in 1970, and is exactly there, with at least from an ILO point of view, the member states can receive further technical assistance from the ILO to better implement their internal labor administration mechanism. Because for the ILO, these are part of the so-called governance conventions, in particular the conventions dealing with the labor inspection, the convention dealing with the labor administration I just mentioned to you, and then there is a convention on tripartite consultation for the implementation of the international labor standard. So it's practically, these are 6 conventions which are called the governance convention, which deal specifically with the administration. So public administration, as you mentioned, is broad, but for more specific labor administration, the ILO has already responded in the years. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
kindly accepted to relay. Yes, but no, the training director says we needed to, and when the training director is speaking about training, is really the highest source of law we have in this room. So, coffee break. Miriam, do you have any?
Okay, that's another way to see the approach in terms of outputs. So all the studies then inform the policy and action plan, which is then implemented. So you can find information on our SPP portal, on our website, and then you have all the outputs from our project. Also, there's a specific link for all the countries where we worked. We've been working since 2012 in about 20 countries through various projects, very often funded by the EU, and mainly in developing countries. You see that we have strong presence in Latin America, we have in Eastern Europe, in Central Asia, and very reduced activity in Africa, but it's recently picking up. So I will focus now, tell you a little bit about our approach. What we call approach is our methodology. So in terms of status assessment, we really try to assess the current level of SPP in the country, understand the steps required to improve SPP, the resources that are available in the country in terms of consultants, in terms of ministries, institutions that have developed some kind of knowledge on SPP, and then they try to increase also the level of awareness raising of the country and the stakeholders on SPP. And the idea is also to have a baseline to check progress at a later stage, and also to benchmark the country position with other countries. So we look at how public procurement is implemented in the country, if there is a previous experience on SPP and GPP, how is public procurement implemented in the organizations that we're going to target, look at the perceptions, barriers, and obstacles regarding SPP and contracting, and then the stakeholders engagement and awareness raising on sustainable procurement. This is done through a questionnaire that also we can share with you. Then we're ready to go into the legal review, which is also really connected to the status assessment, because the idea will be also to know more precisely what is the legal context and the policy related with public procurement and sustainability, understand the financial structure linked to procurement, if there are already guidelines, if there were prioritized products in the country which have led to the development of sustainability criteria, any legal obstacles and opportunities for SPP. And the main objective here is really to propose recommendations to improve the legal framework and procedures. So very often the countries then use this step to really identify the clauses, the articles of the public procurement law that need to be revised in order to have a public procurement legislation more conducive to sustainable procurement. So in terms of report, we're going to look at the national legal framework, constitutional legal framework, the administrative and regulatory legal framework, budgetary regulations, environmental, social, economic regulations. We had Anna mentioned the importance of sectorial legislations, which are really growing and being more and more connected to sustainable procurement. So this is one topic we look at. If there are any SPP obligations from the country, SDG being one of them, and then make the recommendations. An important step, and here you can see that there is an iteration between prioritization and market analysis. So we do that together, because you need to select a number of products. You cannot work on all the products that are being procured by the state authorities. And in the meantime, we have a number of criteria that we use for prioritization, but market is a very important one, because we have to check that there is availability of alternative products on the market, and at which conditions also. So in terms of prioritization, the idea is to look at the risks of the different products and services, also the priorities of the administration in terms of outlined in the strategies of the country on green economy, circular economy, sustainable development, etc. We have to be aligned with those priorities. Then is the sector an important one? Is there a big scope for action in the sector from the state? And then, of course, I said market capacity is important. So we expect to get a greater knowledge and clarity in the priorities of sustainable development, detect areas for improvement regarding the control of public expenditure, have a global view of impacts and risks of public expenditures, and then focus efforts on key issues where we have lower risk and greater efficiency of resources. So basically, we have a process. We're going to develop a preliminary list of product categories. Usually, we start with from the usual suspects, from the EU GPP, or the main categories that are prioritized by the leading countries. And then we narrow down based on the spend analysis, based on the preliminary market study. So we end up with a short list, and we run on the short list another set of screening and looking at the environmental impacts, socioeconomic impacts, existence of certification schemes, and we end up with a master table, which helps us to rank the products and have them develop a final score for the different categories to have a final selection. So I'm sure most of you know about this page where you find the 20 product groups prioritized by the EU in their GPP policy, for which they have developed criteria together with the Sevilla Joint Research Center, which is also in charge of developing the EU eco-label, the flower. So yeah, we end up with this kind of tables where you look at the average price for the alternative product, taking into account life cycle, at least in the total cost of ownership phase, total cost of ownership phase or part. Then market availability, environmental impact, socioeconomic impacts, existence of eco-labels, and we end up prioritizing. In case of Vietnam, for example, they prioritized printing paper, laptops, fluorescent lamps, wooden tables. That was a few years back. Then they have shifted to LEDs. Another example from Ecuador. And that's how we end up with all the countries in which we work with this matrix or list of prioritized product groups. This is example of Ukraine, where the three projects, GIZ, World Bank and UNEP have supported the development of criteria for those 12 product groups that were prioritized by Ukraine. So I mentioned market analysis, which is also connected to prioritization. For us, it's an important step to validate the prioritization, the list of prioritized products. So we're going to look at the productive capacity of sustainable goods and services in the country, the capacity of the market to respond to SPP demands, and the impact on national production. We try to make sure that there won't be displacement of national production in favor of imports or crowding out of national production. And we look at this at current time, but also in a prospective way. We identify also if there are certification and verification tools and the gaps. And we end up with the the expected outcomes are really to help us finalize the list of product groups or services, to know the production versus import outlook, identify the potential role of micro or small medium enterprises in the production or import of the sustainable goods, to detect any projects or measures in favor of sustainable consumption and production, existing policies, for example, and there were a lot that were mentioned by Anna this morning. Of course, to raise awareness of the productive sector on this SPP opportunity. And in the end, after doing that, then once we have prioritized the goods and services through the prioritization, really the usefulness of the market readiness will be to fine-tune the sustainability attributes of the product, because we have different types of products on the market. In developing countries, we don't have the same situations as developed markets. Very often, there are very reduced availability of green products on the market. So we really need to really assess very well, where we put the needle in terms of the request and the sustainability attributes that will be included in sustainable procurement. So with all this information, then we're ready to develop the policy and action plan. The idea there is really to get a commitment to apply SPP, to also work on the institutional aspect, because we really have to get all the institutions together and aligned and collaborate in the implementation of SPP, improve the dialogue with the market and civil society, provide the incentives to national industry and SMEs to develop those products, and then to monitor, of course, the progress. So that's why, the sections of the plan are the following. We look at the context and the background. We use the status assessment for that, the legal framework, and there we include the recommendations for amending the legislations. We look at the institutional framework with recommendations, for example, to create an SPP unit, to see how we can have within ministries and institutions, we have SPP correspondents that work, so create a network of a support network to SPP in the state, in government. Then look at SPP implementation, and there we will have the prioritized products and the criteria, the initial criteria that have been developed for those products. Capacity building, of course, communication, monitoring and control, and of course the budget. What are the means available for implementation. I will now move to the second part, which is on SDG 1271 and the results of our first data collection exercise. I'm sure that you know by heart the 17 development goals, and you're aware that number 12 is on sustainable consumption and production, and that within number 12 there is a specific target on SPP, and the target reads promote public procurement practices that are sustainable in accordance with national policies and priorities. So this is a commitment from the countries that I was talking about. And UNEP is the custodian of this target, and we're in particular we developed the methodology for the measurement indicator, which is the number of countries implementing sustainable public procurement policies and action plans. So we're going to look at, we have to decide how many countries implement sustainable SPP, which means that we have to first check how many countries have policies and action plans. So this question was interesting this morning, because we found that there are action plans, but we have to go beyond, and because you have the word there, implementing. So it's really the plans that are being implemented and that are bearing fruits that we have to evaluate. So we have conducted the first data collection exercise in February. We got 40 submissions. So basically 40 governments responded and provided a report on their progress on SPP. Here you can see that in blue, the countries are mainly in the industrialized world, so North America, Europe, and then Asia. And we have, however, we start having a good presence in Latin America and a more reduced presence in Africa. Here you can see the breakdown of the regional distribution. So we use a formula to calculate the indicator. I'm going to explain, what all these letters mean, the factors. But it's important for you to understand that the difference with the survey or questionnaire is that in our case, we really ask for evidence from the countries on the achievement of their progress and to really score them and evaluate them. We're really strict on providing the evidence. So here we have A multiplied by a series of factors which are adding up. Why do we have this? Because we have A is about the existence of an SPP action plan policy, or we added SPP regulatory requirements. So we check first if countries have an action plan or policy, or if they have strong SPP regulatory requirements, like in the case of India, it is the case. They have regulatory requirements, but they don't have yet an action plan. So we gave them a 1. And then we add the scores of B, C, D, E, F. So if country has 0, then they're not counted anymore. They're not compliant. But if they have 1, then they have a chance, because we are going to check implementation in B, C, D, E, F. So if you have a plan which is not implemented, then you're going to have 1, but you're going to have a low score on B, C, D, E, F, and you're going to be below the cutoff limit. If you are implementing well, then you will have a good score, because B, C, D, E, F is going to add up and put you beyond the cutoff point. So what did we find in our first data collection exercise? Here you can see that from 2004 to 2017, we had in average about 2 new SPP plans per year. And then we have a sudden increase in 2018. And our analysis is that this is connected to the SDG 12.7, because we put really the focus on development of SPP plans. So we believe that countries are responding to this commitment. It could also be connected to the increasing awareness of the importance of sustainable public procurement. So this is another factor that we believe is playing also here. But we can confirm that there is an increasing number of plans being adopted and developed by countries. Then we assess country based on 5 levels. The first level is insufficient provision of data or insufficient implementation. So we had 7 countries out of the 40 that were in this category. Low level of implementation, medium low, medium high, and high level. We had 0 countries in the high level category. Most of the compliant countries from low to medium high. We had 35 countries or 33 countries in the compliance level. And these are mainly in Europe, Latin America, Asia Pacific, and Northern America, with the highest level of compliance that we found in Europe, where you see the dark green, and the US in Northern America. Here I'm going to show you briefly, but this is not going to be shared with you. This is off the record, the results. And you can see that Italy is in the medium high. So congratulations for our Italian friends here. with Belgium, Bulgaria, Latvia, Lithuania, Netherlands, Portugal, and the US. And then we have China, Colombia, Costa Rica, Croatia, Denmark, Dominican Republic, Germany, Japan, Korea, Norway, Philippines, Poland, Slovenia, and Sweden in medium low, and Canada, Cote d'Ivoire, Cyprus, Czech Republic, Finland, Ireland, New Zealand, Panama, Paraguay, Uruguay in low level. However, as I told you, the caveat here is that the countries had to really provide the evidence, and they may be doing well, but if they didn't provide the evidence, then we couldn't score and give them the right score for the particular sub-indicator. So this is what you have to understand is that this is a picture of current SPP implementation based on the criteria that we selected and the provision of corresponding evidence. So in terms of global performance for the different indicators, I skipped, this here, which is very important, is that you understand the content of B, C, D, E, and F. So A is really about existence of plans. B is about the regulatory framework. Is it conducive to sustainable public procurement? Does it support SPP, allow SPP to happen? Then we look at practical support provided to practitioners for the implementation of SPP, guidelines, training, help desk, the information like newsletters, etc., that are produced by the SPP units. Then we look at the development of purchasing criteria or buying standards or requirements that are developed for the prioritized categories, existence of SPP monitoring system, and F is really the only one that looks at the concrete outputs of the policy, the percentage of sustainable purchase of priority products. What we discussed this morning, how much of your procurement is green, right? So here we found that countries were doing well. Of course, A is one because we're only looking at the countries that have an action plan. Then we found that countries were scoring high for the legal part, reasonably well for practical support, a little bit less in terms of producing criteria, doing okay in terms of monitoring, and it was really a low score, in terms of measuring the percentage of SPP, which really corroborates what Anna was saying this morning. So even in the EU, they're not able, with all the means they have, to assess, the percentage of SPP or GPP. So you can imagine in developing countries. So that's why we have these figures. And actually, Asia is leading, in this respect. The regulatory framework, Northern America and Europe are leading, but Asia and Latin America are not very far there. They still have a strong one. In terms of practical support, there is a gap. EU is really, we can see the EU members that are reported are providing strong support to their practitioners. A little bit less in North America and much less in Latin America, where you see that the level of wealth of the country, levels of income of the country plays a role, because you have to dedicate some means to the SPP policy, and they have other priorities, and you can see it here. So in terms of practical support, it's mainly on guidelines and tools. SPP help desk is many, like North America doesn't have them, but Europe is leading on that. Training is okay, best practices and communication. We see that Latin America again is the lagging behind. SPP monitoring system, we have a better performance of Europe and Northern America on this. So I will give you the opportunity to ask questions, but I wanted to finish now with the opportunity of collaboration with SAPIENS and mention that, first of all, on the 1271 methodology, we're looking for support on something I didn't draft this slide after the discussion. I did it before we discussed with Anna, this issue of monitoring, which is also a priority for the EU. we really need to assess the percentage of sustainable purchasing. The F indicator is our objective now to improve it. So finding out, what is the total value of contracts, number of contracts, which includes sustainability requirements, what is considered sustainable purchase or green purchase. This is really our priority. Spend analysis with the products breakdown, meaning developing an international classification so that all countries report in the same way. And then, of course, I could have added using AIs and digital technologies to help us do that. We are at a point now where these technologies, can be mobilized to help us find answers to these questions. So I welcome any discussions with you on this. And we will be also discussing with the EC. The second area where we're really developing new tools is with the UNDP. We're developing an ESG weighted procurement portfolio model. I'm sure many of you know about what is a procurement portfolio model. In the past, it was applied to other aspects than sustainability. Now we're trying to include sustainability aspects in these models so that governments can manage also sustainability risks and develop a set of propositions for sustainable procurement strategies to enhance sustainable public procurement. So we're trying to modify this model and include then SPP or sustainability in these models. So the model will be useful to develop a segmentation model which reflect category-specific sustainability risk profiles. So for each purchasing category, we will assess its particular risk. And then this will be also useful for public procurement strategies and formulate guidance for management decisions in this area. So this is related to organizations, but then this is more UNEP, which UNDP, sorry, is more interested in this aspect for their own procurement. Ourselves in UNEP, we're more interested in the policy applications of this model because this will help us prioritize specific spend categories. Okay, you remember we spoke about the risk assessment for categories. If we use this model, then we'll be able to better assess the risk of the categories. And then in the end, maybe have a picture of the sustainability footprint of the procurement portfolio of a given organization. This, and maybe here using also the technologies, the digital technologies. So this is the ultimate goal, is that we tell an organization to give us their spend data, and then we plug it into the model, and then we issue a report and we tell them this is where you lie in terms of complying with sustainability objectives or sustainability footprint, environmental footprint of your procurement. But, we're very far from that. But this is, you have to have dreams. And this is one dream that we have. We want to share with you, and we want to maybe accompany and get your support in realizing it. So we're using the sustainability indicators from the UN global market. So there is the 4 aspects of social, environmental, governance, and economics. I'm not going to go into that, but I can share with you the details of these specific impacts, sustainability impacts that we're considering in assessing the risk exposure of certain categories. The end result will be something like this kind of matrix that you're also familiar with in the procurement portfolio model, where you then are able to see where you stand in terms of ESG score and spend. And this allows you then to take corrective measures and better fine-tune your procurement strategy. So next steps is for us to improve the quality of the risk ratings. This is the challenge, right? Is to identify for each category what are the ratings, the risk ratings attached to this specific category that vary from region to region, that vary from in terms of suppliers. Just one example is the type of electricity you use, if it's used from coal or from renewable energy sources, then you have different carbon impacts, of course. So we have to look at all that, and it's not simple, but this is how we have to do it. We should be able to deliver real-time risk alerts to procuring entities, then enhance market engagement strategies and best practices. And we also need to establish governance protocol for this tool, how we make it, for example, an open data model, open source data model, and how we share also the ratings with our partners, and more globally, is something we have to look at. So thank you very much for the interest and
Thanks a lot, Farid, for this great presentation. I guess there are a lot of questions, but we can only take two. And
three.
It's already 4.
No.
And so I will give.
I'm going to be quick in my response.
Are you staying with us at lunch?
Yeah, lunch.
Okay, you can just make his lunch impossible by asking a question at that moment. No. I think Laura, who hasn't yet asked a question? Yes, you have. Anyone? You never asked. Sorry, I still have to memorize the names.
Haysam.
It gaze. Yes. Oh, brilliant. Thank you.
Hi, I'm ECR6, focusing on life cycle costing, life cycle assessment, more in construction and construction materials. So how interested are you in using life cycle assessment indicators for environmental sustainability and life cycle costing for economic sustainability, and maybe introducing material passports for different kind of materials that have their environmental impact and economical impact already in international template format?
Thank you. Yes, and I should say that UNEP also hosts the Life Cycle Initiative that maybe you're aware of, and that connects all the LCA, Life Cycle Assessment databases in the world. And this is important because the procurement portfolio model, has and the ratings will be connected to the life cycle assessment in a specific category. We have to look at it, of course, in a life cycle manner, and the information, the data is available with the scientists that are producing those life cycle assessments. So the databases will feed, our model, our procurement model. So of course, this is taken care of and important. Now, construction is even more important because that's an area where life cycle life cycle analysis is critical, because you have running costs. It's over long periods, right? And the type of materials you use and the energy, efficiency of the buildings makes such a big difference in the final cost that you have to consider that. So yes, our model is completely connected to the life cycle thinking, and especially for construction. I'm not myself a specialist, but I can put you in touch with my colleagues, either from Life Cycle Initiative, and then you can find that on the page, or the people that work on construction in our division. Also, for you to know that there is the OECD is organizing its annual meeting of public procurement practitioners, Roberto, and the topic this year will be on sustainability of the construction sector. So it's at the end of October, so follow that closely, and it will be on sustainability of construction sector. For the first time, they're putting sustainability at the heart of the public procurement annual meeting. So that will be an important event to follow for you. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, indeed, what really has surprised me until 4 or 5 years ago, well, Farid was working a lot, but a lot of international organizations were just in denial. I had a chat with a friend working at UNCITRAL, and I told her, well, but you should consider also sustainability in the model law. And she said, not at all. This is a distraction. And now you see the multilateral development banks, the OECD, everyone really wanting to contribute. And you are really starting your thesis at the most auspicious time for sustainable public procurement. And you can really contribute. And we will be most happy to work with the European Commission, since they have so many initiatives, and with UNEP. Actually, we had a preparation meeting for this project thanks to Farid at UNEP's headquarters. So we will really stay in touch. So thank you very much for now. I will not take the second question, just to give the floor to Lorenza and Christine.